All right, hello everyone, and welcome today to what's going to be podcast. You know, sometimes I really actually need to get my shit in order a little bit more, just because. Podcast 119. I am your host, Ram Prime 1000, of course, because who else would host this massive heaping pile of trash? And today we are going to talk about quite a few things. Now, I've been kind of bad about this. I'm always bad about the podcast. If I'm not delaying it indefinitely or flat out not doing it, I'm constantly pushing it back when I just need to do it. So I think today, of any day, would be a good day to do it, just because there's a lot of stuff that recently happened in the world of gaming, and also just because it's been a while since I've done it. So first things first, where do we even begin in this monstrous pile of topics? First off, Persona 4 sold better than Sega expected on PC. Now, I think part of that is, again, due to Sony Vegas, Jesus. Persona 4 being a very popular title. It's its first outing on the PC. People just want to buy it either for nostalgia, just to have a classic JRPG, a beloved game. And I also bought it. I haven't played it yet. That's because I already played Golden, which is kind of one of my things. But specifically speaking, I think it's really kind of cool that I think a lot of Japanese devs are starting to realize that just putting stuff on consoles is not enough anymore. And that's actually something that I think I've mentioned before on the podcast with different companies. Like Capcom is making sure as many consoles as possible get their games, as well as other companies. Konami tried to do that a little bit towards the end with Phantom Pain and Ground Zeroes, whereas usually Metal Gear was a Sony exclusive. They had Ground Zeroes survive and Phantom Pain all come out on multiple consoles. It's something that I think towards the mid-2010s, a lot of companies realized is that exclusivity doesn't always help. In fact, in the long term, it's probably better to be a timed exclusive at worst, which is, I think, what Square is seeing with the Final Fantasy VII remake. They know that everybody wants to play Final Fantasy VII, and so what better way to play Final Fantasy VII than to have it on every console? But Sony wanted the year exclusivity, so they have that. That expires, I believe, in March or April of 2021. So at that point, we'll probably see plans or flat out see a launch for Final Fantasy VII. But getting back to Sega, after Persona 5, which it's kind of a very ironic, because the games that people really want to play, which is Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royale, are still console locked and they're console exclusive. So it's kind of ironic that they have a game sell out way more than what they figured. And Persona 5 was a success, a massive one by any measure. But it's kind of ironic that Persona 4 basically gets a second life just because they open it up to just one extra platform of availability. And I mean, hopefully we kind of see more of that, because I know a lot of people definitely want to play it. A lot of people, that's kind of why the whole idea of console exclusivity is kind of starting to go, especially for a lot of third-party devs, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Now, next on the list is Metroid Prime 4 is looking for a new lead designer. Metroid Prime 4 being the long-delayed Metroid game. And as a Metroid fan, I'll say this. I'd rather they get it right than fuck up and get it wrong. Because after Other M, they didn't even really release a real game for 7 years. Samus Returns was fun. It was good. I enjoyed it. I thought it was the next logical step in the Metroid remake series. Now, I don't know if they're ever going to actually get around to remaking Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion. They hinted at Metroid Fusion's events in Samus Returns because of the whole timeline, but I don't know if they're going to actually go through with it, and I don't know how that's actually going to play into effect. So I'd rather they get it done right than release it and it's garbage like Other M, because I flat out did not enjoy Other M, especially for the story. And I know that that's kind of, I mean, I would say that about any game, actually. I'd rather it be done right and be done well than just be done and then just, oh, okay, cool, the game sucks, nobody plays it again. Because that's to me the worst thing that can happen to a game, is it just comes out, it's average, and then within a couple of weeks you forget about it, or just within time it kind of doesn't go anywhere and you forget about it. And one of the longest games I could think about that did this right was Ghost of Tsushima, which has been thrown around for quite a ton of E3s. I think at least 3 E3s it's been thrown around. Probably had some time before that. And it comes out and it looks nice, it's great, it's fun, and it's a game I'm going to fondly remember, possibly even revisit just to kind of mop up the last couple of things, because it's actually a really fun game, and I actually really do enjoy it. Whereas with, I don't know, there's a lot of games that fit in this category, but I can't think of any one in particular. But there's a lot of times that games that have been hyped will just come out, they exist, and then you forget about them. I mean, I could think of one, like Halo 5, for instance, if you weren't really in the Halo sphere. That, to my knowledge, kind of came out, it existed, it disappeared. I think Last of Us 2 is experiencing that now that all the hype and buzz around it and all the bullshit around it is finally simmered down and doesn't really have any bearing anymore. Last of Us 2 kind of came out, had its whole fan base thing, had its whole story debacle and all the bullshit Sony did, and then just disappeared. And that's kind of really it. And now apparently Fall Guys has made more money than it. You know, so sometimes less is more. And with Metroid Prime 4, I'd rather they take more time to make it right than to just drop it and say, well, you have another game out. Because you know what, I'd rather sit with Samus Returns for another couple of years and just have Metroid be a nice slow burn, but it's very efficient and well done. Left 4 Dead 2 is getting a new community-made update. They actually talked about this on the Valve News Network, which I'd completely forgotten about, which is all on me. They are releasing an extra DLC for it, almost, I think, 7 years after the last final official update. Now, this one, I believe, is community-made, but the fact that Left 4 Dead 2 is... I mean, I kind of figured Left 4 Dead 2 would get constant updates. I mean, the Valve games usually have pretty long longevity. It kind of surprised me that Left 4 Dead 2, which was already a game that I remember at the time when it was announced, like a year after Left 4 Dead 1, people were like, but wait, what happened to the long, the long amount of stuff that you promised for Left 4 Dead 1? And Valve wanted to make a new game, so they made it. I mean, Left 4 Dead 2 is good. I preferred the feel of the first game. I think it was a tighter-knit experience. But Left 4 Dead 2 is a fun game. I mean, I obviously played a lot of it. I own it on both 360 and PC, because back then I used to play it on both. And it was a fun game. I actually really enjoyed it. So it's cool to see that these games still exist even into the future, which is really fucking awesome. And honestly, I really kind of like that. Specifically, Counter-Strike does this a lot with custom maps and all the custom modes, but I really do like it that Left 4 Dead is getting community updates and stuff like that. Super Mario 3D All-Stars announced. Now, this one is a pretty divisive thing. First off, it is a collection that includes, I put Super Mario because I guess I was just being dumb when I wrote this. Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy 1. There's no Galaxy 2 in this, which is actually surprising. There's also going to be a remaster of Super Mario 3D World, which will include a mode called Bowser's Fury. That comes out later in February of 2021. It'll come out, I think it's like February 12th maybe, based on what I saw. So that's going to be kind of cool. So really Galaxy 2 has just been completely forgotten about and thrown to the complete side. Other than that though, it's going to include Super Mario 64, Sunshine, and Galaxy 1. Now, Galaxy 1 and Sunshine have been actually stretched and updated to reflect 16:9 and output at whatever the Switch's native is, because, the Switch is kind of this weird fucking console. But Super Mario 64 is still stuck at 4:3, and the reason why that's kind of shitty is because there have already been mods that have made Super Mario 64 16:9. And even if you, like at the bare minimum, you kind of expect that they would go that extra mile, especially for a game that's so goddamn important to Nintendo's history. The game that constantly gets cited as, like, the baseline for not open world, I'm sorry, for 3D platformers. That sort of a thing you would kind of expect, like, oh yeah, of course we're going to have this game be new and fleshed out. And not to mention, they had the remake on the 3D, on the normal DS, which in my opinion, I prefer that one because it has more stuff in it. But I mean, Mario 64 is like one of those N64 timeless classics, along with like Ocarina and GoldenEye, that just insists on like, people always reference it to this day. You would think that they would take the extra time and care, maybe even do something like a Halo CE, where they have like the ability to choose what kind of graphics you want. You know, just sort of touch it up, right? Have the Mario collection have this extra amount of care and love in it. You know, even if you want to say like Sunshine and Galaxy look good enough to this day that you just kind of leave them as they were. At least Mario 64, I could see the argument that it's definitely a major game. I think it's one that they should put a lot of care into, and they have not, which is really kind of a detriment. Now, for me personally, I don't really give a shit about Mario 64. It's not one of my favorite games. It's a game I think is good. I just don't really enjoy it as much as Sunshine. So really, this collection for me is just Sunshine, and maybe once I beat that, I'll dabble in a couple of the other games. Well, there's only two. Now, there's been some talk about how it's actually just repackaged emulators of these games, and honestly, that doesn't really bother me for a couple of reasons. First off, because to be frank, a lot of these old games that get put on new consoles are just basically emulation. If they're not ports, especially with what Nintendo and Square have been doing with their Final Fantasy games, and or virtual console games, I mean, that's basically just emulation at its core. And I mean, I'd say it bodes worse for the whole idea of the Switch having backwards compatibility, which again, I mean, a lot of people shit on backwards compatibility, but I think it really is a major focus, especially for the other two consoles coming out, that they want you to be able to at least replay the last generation. Now, Sony has already come out, and spoiler alert, because it's actually later on in this podcast, and if it isn't, I'm going to insert it. Oh, fuck me, right here. No, I don't want to link my actual Discord. That's actually a mistake. Sony has already come out and denied that the PS5 will have backwards compatibility with PS3. I'm going to put denied. There you go. Because I like that. But Xbox, this has been a major focus point of their console, is that they want to distinctly make sure that you have the ability to play your favorite games wherever and whenever you play them. Now, the problem with that for Xbox, and why it doesn't work out totally, is that unlike the other two, the Xbox library is kind of shitty until like maybe the 360 era. And even then, by the 360 era, a lot of these games have been either reported, remastered already, ported to other consoles, remastered already, or remade. You know, like, I think to some of the games that I've played on the 360, right? Like, my first 360 game was Halo 3. And Halo 3, obviously, is the big game, and it actually just got re-released in the Master Chief Collection, and it's been in the Master Chief Collection, to my understanding, for the Xbox since either launch or immediately following it. So, Halo 3 has already been re-released multiple times over, if you don't want to play it on your 360. Tales of Vesperia got its enhanced definitive edition with all the content from the PS3 version, so that's already been done. You know, the Lego games have all been ported, or they're getting updated versions, like Skywalker Saga, you know, Star Ocean: The Last Hope, which was a game that was on 360, has already been it was expanded. It had an expanded version for the PS3. Eternal Sonata had an expanded version for the PS3. I think really the only couple of games that they still have are like the Blue Dragon and Mistwalker games, like Blue Dragon and Lost Odyssey, which are fantastic games but have not been re-released. I know they recently added that backwards compatibility for Lost Odyssey to the Xbox One, which is cool, but at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, those are niche games. They were niche when they came out, and I kind of, on a side note, I kind of miss the Xbox era where they had that push to get JRPGs on their console, because some of them were honestly really good, even if they were kind of obtuse and cheesy. I think like games like Eternal Sonata, really, you don't get stuff like that. And that's kind of the type of game I really do enjoy. I thought it was really interesting when it wasn't trying to have a cheesy love plot. The story isn't really expanded upon that much either. It's not a fantastic game, but it's memorable because of the visuals, I think, and the combat. Completely unrelated to the topic at hand, the point is to backwards walk my way out of the hole I've dug myself into, is that this console generation, I think there's going to be a huge push to keep people playing the games that they liked from the past. Now, Sony has already kind of thrown that the fuck out, but I think at least for PS4 games and for Xbox One, and Microsoft goes a little further than that, that's going to be a major portion of it, because they want people to be able to continue to play their old games. It basically pads out their new consoles library, so they don't have to force out a bunch of games at the start, especially in the middle of the global event going on. They do not have to basically kill themselves in order to get these games out on time and to have a roster, because when the PS4 first dropped, I mean, other than like Killzone and Knack, there weren't really many games, especially in my experience. I didn't really want anything that the console had to offer until Watch Dogs came out. And even after Watch Dogs, there wasn't really much else for me to play. In fact, distinctly back then, I was still playing my 360 more, and I was playing Lightning Returns. I was playing, what's that game? The one, Ground Zeroes was one of them. And, you know, it kind of went from there. But I think that with Nintendo having this console that is really just massively inferior, possesses little to no hard drive space, very, very weak, but I mean, at least it's portable. I think that while it is a cool thing to have it portable, it definitely underperforms in a lot of aspects, and they have not really lived up to some of the standards that they set with the Wii U, especially with regards to Virtual Console. The only thing that the Switch has is that, like, everybody wants to put their games from, like, 7 years ago over it, or on it, which is kind of cool, I guess, but, like, after a point, it's just, like, other than the Wii U games being moved over and having extra content, like, what else are they really going to add to it? You know, like, they need new games, and they have new games. In fact, they announced a new Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, which we will, I mean, I guess I'll talk about it now. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity was announced on September 8th. It drops on November 20th, which is pretty cool. It's going to basically be a canon prequel to Breath of the Wild, in the form of Hyrule Warriors, and that's kind of cool. They didn't really announce it until it was basically 2 months out, which is pretty awesome as well, so that we don't have massive speculation. You know, it just will come out, and it'll just be a game you could play in like two months. In fact, at this point, it's looking really close. So I do think that there is some amount of what's the word I'm looking for? I do think that there is some amount of importance that they need to put on having these backwards compatible games, but I really don't think Nintendo, frankly, knows what they want to do. I think they had a lot of people buy stuff on the Wii U, and even if you bought not a lot of the fucking backwards compatible games, right? Like, even if you bought only a couple, you know, if they ever do have a console where you can use them, I think what's going to be a big problem is that they're going, if they want to make it so, like, because I don't think anyone wants to buy it twice. I sure as fuck would not want to rebuy my Wii U library twice. Like, that spits on the whole idea of having it. And, you know, with Sunshine being re-released, what is it, like 17 years, 18 years later, I kind of am starting to get my GameCube library back together. You know, we already have the Metroid Primes. We have, well, what we really need is Pikmin 1 and 2 collection. With Pikmin 3 being remade soon, or remastered soon, that'll be pretty cool. With new content, mind you, which will be pretty fun to play again. You know, it's just kind of one of those things. It's like, well, how are they going to address that? And I think that's kind of ultimately the problem with Nintendo's gimmicks, is that Nintendo made a lot of gimmicks which basically define the way those games were played. And now I don't really know how you're going to be able to not play that. So, for instance, in Sunshine, the GameCube had analog triggers, which would measure how much you were pushing down on the actual trigger. Well, it's not triggers, the L and R buttons. They weren't really triggers back then. No console had triggers. And because of that, the Switch has only digital buttons. It only registers if you're pushing it or not pushing it. It doesn't determine how much you're pushing it. It only sees, oh, you're pushing it, cool. And because of that, you know, a little bit of worry is given to how they're going to handle it. I mean, they could map buttons, right? I forget how much the analog affected Mario Sunshine, because it's been a while, and honestly, I don't know how it'll really map. I think it'll mostly map, and I think, and from what I've seen, it plays pretty fine. But you know, it'll be one of those cases where I play a game, and I feel like I'm gonna notice like the intricacies of it a bit. And what's also kind of sad is that they have the ability for GameCube controllers to be registered by the Switch, and the actual one GameCube game on the Switch, which is Sunshine, will not be able to register GameCube controllers. And that to me is just a complete waste. It's just a complete loss. Frankly, there's no reason in the world why that should not be the case. And again, part of that is because Nintendo has gone through so many iterations of controllers. They don't have a standard. Like the standard PlayStation controller, other than the grip, did not change from Generation 1 to Generation 4. The only, like they added a slab, the touch button, and got rid of Start Select, which is whatever. But other than that, the console more or less remained the same. The Xbox controller, after ditching the Duke, has virtually not changed since the 360 days. The Nintendo consoles have basically changed every single time, and it's kind of sad and funny at the same time because they constantly keep coming back to the GameCube when people want to play things like Smash. And it's weird to me that they see that people would like the GameCube controllers and it works, but instead of manufacturing those and just having you use like wireless versions of those, they would rather force you to utilize the Pro Controller or the Joy-Cons or the Wiimotes. And I mean, it just gets to be really clusterfucky. Like, Galaxy is fundamentally going to be changed based on the fact that you're going to have to, you no longer have the ability to use, you're no longer going to have the ability to use the Joy-Cons, or not the Joy-Cons, I'm sorry, the nunchucks in order to swing and wave and do all the weird stuff that Nintendo wanted in every game back in 2007. And while it helps with some games like Metroid Prime, it doesn't always translate to long term. I mean, Metroid Prime could always just be rebound into an actual FPS. Now, will they do that hypothetically in the future? Who knows? Because it's Nintendo, they'll find a way to drop the ball on something, you just don't know what. Or worst case, it just goes back to how it was in Metroid Prime 1, which was very jarring, and I hope they don't do that, because the entirety of the FPS genre has come and gone in the or come and stayed in the last 20 years. So it really is just one of those things. I think Nintendo's concept of having backwards compatibility is finally just going to start to bite them in the ass, because they have too many ways to play too many games that they no longer want to support. They have an entire line of 3DS games and DS games that are now essentially on dead hardware because they've moved over to focus on the Switch. The Switch, of course, which does not feature compatibility with all these different games. They don't feature compatibility with Wii games. They only tangentially allow you to use a GameCube controller and not even for the one GameCube game that's on the console. And it just feels like wasted potential to me, because people would run out and buy old Nintendo games in a hurry. I don't think there would be any shortage of people buying like Super Smash Bros. Melee if it were on a virtual console, or someone like me buying Pikmin 2 and 1 on a virtual console, because then I wouldn't have to use my old discs anymore, right? Like, I would have the discs, but I wouldn't have to put them in and like, it's, you know, like the year is still 2001. It would just be easy for people to access that. And out of every console on the market, Nintendo needs this the most, and they started it in the Wii U. They did start it in the Wii, kind of. But the Wii U was really the first and best method of them doing that. The 3DS had some of it at the end for, like, Game Boy Color and stuff. But, like, the Wii U specifically had it for pretty much every console besides the GameCube. And they didn't have the full libraries, but they had a sizable portion. I mean, to say that they missed most of the major games wouldn't be too wrong, but I just don't understand why they don't do that. Why is it not available? Why are stuff like, you know, Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, and Leaf Green not available for you to play, whereas, you know, stuff like, I just feel like being able to resell those Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon games, along with some of the niche franchises, would be a big thing. It would be a big source of revenue, because people still buy Pokemon, especially after Sword and Shield fractured its fan base. I think people would still want to buy and support more classic Pokemon titles, because the virtual console titles for Gen 1 and Gen 2 were very well received, and people like that. It just seems silly to me that they do not have the 3DS take up that role. You know, they have weird remakes on the 3DS, like Luigi's Mansion got a remake on it. And they have like I said, the Pokemon games on it. And I just feel like Nintendo just sometimes reaches out and does a lot of things good in one direction and then completely misses the mark on another, whereas it would have just been better to either do half and half or focus on the other one altogether. And the Super Mario 3D All-Stars run is basically that. Also, it's limited, by the way, so you can only buy it from now until March. I'm not sure if they announced what date in March it will not be available, but presumably they will no longer be making physical copies at that point, and they will be pulling it from digital storefronts, which to me makes absolutely zero sense. Nothing about this 3D All-Stars announcement really kind of makes too much sense. It doesn't make sense that Mario 64 has basically been untouched, not even stretched to 16:9. It doesn't make sense that Sunshine cannot utilize the GameCube controller if you have it. It does not make any sense how Galaxy 1 is going to really make use of anything. I mean, I guess they could rebind stuff, but it also doesn't make much sense why Galaxy 2 is not in. I don't know why. And lastly, it doesn't really make much sense how they've chosen to handle most of it. Now, that said, it'll still be a good collection just based purely on the fact that these games are good, but how they handled it was probably in the most obtuse way possible, and it just really is just more of the same for Nintendo, more of the usual sort of shenanigans, which I don't really understand. A lot of it is their stuff coming back to roost, which I think is pretty miserable, and it doesn't really need to be this way, but I don't know why they're putting all their eggs in the Switch basket. I think they see a lot of money coming from it, which is definitely good. But from a gameplay perspective, it doesn't play what it has particularly well outside of some and most first parties. And even then, like, it's not a graphical powerhouse. It's not. It kind of just feels like a very cheap, weak console that makes a lot of money, and it just happened to catch on. And that's good for them, but in the long run, I mean, what are we going to see with the next console? I don't really know. I would honestly prefer something more classic, and I think people have been saying that for a long time. It really needs to take the best elements of the Wii U and combine it with, I don't know, just what everyone else is doing, which is basically the same thing I've said for the last decade, because I'm tired of playing Nintendo games on inferior hardware. And in general, if you want to ever really have them compete with anyone else, and even people will say, well, it's not about them competing, which is fine, but then they put on multi-plat games, and that to me is basically the definition of competing to some degree, because otherwise they wouldn't make a big deal about it. And I think part of that is just because they can't pump out enough games to justify it otherwise. So yeah, you can play Witcher 3, and then I don't know if there's a Fallout game on it, you know, all these other games on the go, but that's it. If you're not playing them on the go, you are hands down getting a inferior experience. And I just struggle to think of how a great game like Three Houses could have been if it had better graphics and bigger effects and more stuff to it that it could handle. And while it does handle it very well because it's not a very intensive game, unlike Fire Emblem Warriors, which at launch handled it pretty poorly, give or take, it would be just better for them to invest in that, especially when you see that these new consoles do so much more. It's hard to really equate the Switch on it. Even though now it kind of doesn't, it will eventually get to that point, and we're starting to get to that point even more than we were 7 years ago when every console was kind of really shitty by comparison. Speaking of other consoles, Microsoft announced their price for the new Xbox Series X will be $500. The Series S, which is a discless digital-only model, will be $300, and the pre-order starts September 22nd. It releases on November 10th. Now, I guess I'll jump ahead to what happened yesterday, which was the Sony PlayStation 5 reveal. To start off, this puts every state of play to shame. In my opinion, the state of plays have been like basically time wasters and boring as fuck compared to what we saw yesterday. What we saw yesterday was basically E3 for them. First things first, they start off with, and if you've seen my stream, you'll know that even I didn't recognize this at first, other than it seeming very, very familiar. Final Fantasy XVI was revealed. And not only was Final Fantasy XVI revealed, It is directed by Yoshi P, who is the director behind Final Fantasy XIV. The story is being written by the Heavensward team, and long story short, there's a lot of good information and stuff about it being thrown out there. And needless to say, the idea of them having the man who salvaged 14 make a new game is ingenious, in my opinion. It is a perfect idea for them to have that, and it honestly the logical choice after 15 and Tabata kind of petered off and wasn't really that great, and the disaster that preceded that for almost like 5 years. It would be good for Final Fantasy to have somebody who's proven that they can make a good game and a return to form take the reins. And I could not think of anyone more qualified than that, than the man that turned shit into gold, which is Yoshi P. And over the last 7 years, they have gradually turned Final Fantasy XIV from an average reboot that's serviceable into what most people consider to be an award-winning MMO. And I personally love it a lot. I think that the story is great. I think that the gameplay is great. And so because of that, I definitely am really anticipating it. Now, they are getting a bunch of different things to come into play here. They are going to get... They have no release date for this. It's probably not even far off, or not even far off. It's probably not even anywhere in the near future. It is an upcoming PS5 game. However, it apparently will also come to PC. So this is the first time they've had a Final Fantasy game, I think, be multiplat at launch besides 15. And no, yeah. I don't count 14. I don't count MMOs. MMOs kind of have to be on PC by definition. But it's they kind of slid it in that it's also coming to PC. It wasn't really talked about much in the trailer. They more or less only showed it briefly at the end that it was coming to PC. It's definitely going to have a return to form. They don't want any of the ridiculous or science fiction that they've had in the last couple of ones, it seems. So basically, they're trying to make a modern day classic Final Fantasy, which for me, it kind of felt like we were going back to Versus 13 levels, because Versus 13, which eventually became Final Fantasy 15 in all its mediocrity, kind of wanted to do that. It wanted to be a blend between like the PlayStation 1 era Final Fantasies and onward, which were very science fiction based almost in a lot of ways, and the classic elements of Final Fantasy from like 1 to 6 in the Tactics series, which I think was a perfect idea at the time. Unfortunately, we all know what happened to it. A lot of development hell, a lot of technological problems. Eventually Tabata took over, and then we got, in my opinion, 2 games in one, which is Versus 13 and then Final Fantasy 15. And ultimately, that was a very mediocre experience for me. I found it to be very lackluster and underwhelming on pretty much every aspect, other than maybe graphics at the time. So Final Fantasy 16 is going to be more action-based. They have hired the battle director, the designer of Devil May Cry 5 and Dragon's Dogma, Suzuki. I didn't put his first name, which is kind of bad of me. As the battle director. So it will be a more action-oriented game as opposed to maybe more turn-based. I don't think we're ever really going to get turn-based, but just for clarity, Naoki Yoshida is the producer of Final Fantasy XIV, which is an MMO. So this is pretty much the first iteration of it really being a single-player game. I don't think he's directed a single-player game to my knowledge before. However, for the most part, Shadowbringers at a lot of cases was kind of single player. I mean, again, an MMO is kind of never really single player by definition, but Shadowbringers definitely, between stuff like the trust system and the heavy emphasis on story, has definitely been more single player-ish, at least for just playing through the story. So it's definitely going to be more action heavy, and because of that, it like just watching the trailer, you know, there's a part where he's fighting Marlboros and other stuff. It just looks more like Versus 13 was supposed to be, which was that it was supposed to be a darker iteration in the Final Fantasy series. You were supposed to have, you know, more realistic elements and faster paced combat, remembering at the time that Versus 13 was new. Kingdom Hearts 2 had just come out like a year or two prior, and it was so, you know, part of the whole PlayStation 3, you know, not launch lineup, but near future games in like 2008, where they were going to have stuff like Versus 13 be like the next big iteration of Final Fantasy, and because of that, it's very easy to see how that kind of influenced it. Now, as I said on my streams, one of the things that I really have hope for, and I know I'm talking a lot about this game because this is really important to me, at least. One of the big things I have hope for in this game is that you can have the 15 system, which is basically the versus 13 system. Even if there's only one playable character, you can have it, but don't have the game be as watered down and basic as 15 was, because 15 at its core was a very simple, watered down game. At no point in the combat are you ever really out of options, provided you bought yourself a ton of potions, and the gameplay is very straightforward and just easy. The game itself is not very difficult at all. You get down, you just drink a potion, you come back. It gets to the point where you don't even really need to heal wound damage, because wound damage is nothing really. And I'm really hoping that we don't get a game that's half linear and otherwise, you know, half linear and half open world. If you're gonna go, I would prefer an open world Final Fantasy. I mean, every other franchise has gotten an open world style game, and it would be nice to have that sort of gameplay and elements like what we had in Final Fantasy 12, but fully done in an open world where you can free roam, go where you want, do what you must, and in general just enjoy, you know, kind of making your own way through a game. I mean, the way open world games are is that no two people really have the same experience, which is really what I like about it, is that based on what, like, the best open world games, you could do anything at any time in any way for multiple playthroughs. So with advanced knowledge, you could do stuff differently. And that's, in my opinion, why I really enjoy about open world games. And it really sucks that Final Fantasy did not really adopt that fully with 15, instead opting for linear, which would be bad. I wouldn't want that. Now, at the current time, it's not really known if you'll have like a party system or something. Parties in Final Fantasy are pretty much as old as the very first game. Almost every game that I think in the Final Fantasy universe has ever existed has had some sort of party system, other than Lightning Returns and Vagrant Story, which are the two that really come to mind. Now, there are iterations where you could maybe take only one person into battle, like 12 and, you know, Tactics Advance and stuff like that. But the general gist of the game and the basic mechanics of the game is that Final Fantasy is meant to have party members. You're meant to play alongside people, not real people, play alongside other characters. You know, maybe they're different classes or different stuff. And it'll be interesting to see how that works out. If this will be more of a standalone story like Lightning Returns, or if it'll be some sort of mixed up party amalgamation. We just haven't seen much other than maybe like a proof of concept is like what I like to say it as. The main character is going to be a prince's bodyguard. The world is going to be more classic. There's not going to be a car this time. There's going to be actual chocobos to ride, which again is kind of very 14-esque. They did put the regalia in, but it was as a timed event, and you still can't get it, which is hilarious. So I think that'll ultimately be pretty interesting. I'm really looking forward to this game, and I hope it dodges all the pitfalls that the previous iterations have. And the reason that I'm hopeful and reasonably believe that it will is because Final Fantasy Final Fantasy 14, despite being an MMO, has found a way to be probably one of the best Final Fantasies in the last decade, especially Shadowbringers. I really feel that the story of it was fun, it was interesting. I really have enjoyed every expansion of 14, and even though I have numerous gripes and complaints with the game at certain times between balancing changes and design decisions, ultimately it is still a very fun game and one that I enjoy, and the game I have spent literally the most amount of time in my life on. It is by far a fun experience that I have enjoyed over the last 5 years, and I absolutely will continue to enjoy it because it is a very fun game. Now, obviously more will be told about Final Fantasy 14. I think, and the story is being done by the Heavensward team, by the way. I forget if I mentioned that. And Heavensward, which was the first expansion of Final Fantasy 14, was really one of the big kickoff points for it as a game. That's where a large chunk of people joined in. People loved Heavensward. To summarize it very heavily, people loved Heavensward. I'm looking for something. I'm not going to find it. So that'll be pretty good to see. So other than that, at the Sony PlayStation 5 reveal, they showed off Spider-Man Miles Morales. They showed off Hogwarts Legacy, which, if you've been following some rumors lately, Avalanche Studios have been working on a Harry Potter inspired game. I think it's set way before Harry Potter as a prequel. You'll be able to go to Hogwarts, learn spells, and I'm kind of drawing on my experience from the first two Harry Potter games, which played very much like action-adventure platforming games. They will probably have some amount of mystery and intrigue and different stories. I don't know if it's supposed to be canon to the actual events of Harry Potter, but at least it's an interesting sort of a concept, to be able to take a character, to go into this fleshed out fantasy world. I mean, everybody talks about it, right? So like everybody knows what Harry Potter is. So it's an interesting sort of a game that you really wonder why it's never been done. I think maybe they want some distance between them and the very depressing end of the Harry Potter game series, and also just because Harry Potter kind of exists in this weird state of relevancy between being popular and also just kind of having had its heyday in the sun. So Harry Potter is definitely kind of a cool thing to see. I was not expecting them to announce that and 16. Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, they showed off a little bit of the campaign, which is whatever, that's cool. I'd like to point out the irony of the campaign of Activision talking about the campaign, dealing with hard truths when they remove footage from Tiananmen Square from the trailer, which in my mind is them cucking out. And it's really kind of sad that a game that advertises itself as having basically the Activision equivalent of EA's Battlefield's textbook, or what was it? What the fuck did they call it for Battlefield? I'm sorry, they called it something, but this is basically like textbook realism 2.0 a la Treyarch, and they have decided to cut out the hard truths that they supposedly want to base the game off of. I mean, they clearly showed the footage, and then they edited it later to not have it in there. So in my mind, that's pretty sad, honestly, that they can't even keep true to their own tagline, obviously, without immediately backing down and bending the knee to corporate powers and to China. That's really fucking pathetic. But other than that, I mean, I like the HUD. I think it looks nice, but I'm not really interested in Call of Duty anymore. I haven't really enjoyed a Call of Duty game since 2012. So, I mean, at this point, if I haven't really enjoyed it since 2012, I don't think 8 years later I'm still going to randomly enjoy it. They showed off more of Deathloop, Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition, which will have Virgil as a character, Oddworld Soulstorm, which is the sequel to the Oddworld remake. I think they're trying to do like a new timeline, if I'm not mistaken, because there was a timeline in the original Oddworld. Demon's Souls PS5 looks absolutely amazing and absolutely gorgeous, so credit to them for that. God of War Ragnarok was also dropped as well. And lastly, the price of the console is $500 for the disc version and $400 for the digital. Now, basically, to go back to what I was talking about like ages ago, the Xbox Series X will be $500 and the PlayStation 5 will be $500. I think Microsoft really fucked up by going first. I think that by going first, they allowed Sony to price match them instead of waiting to see if Sony were going to maybe price it a little too high and they could undercut it. So they're both going to be at the same price. The Series S will be $300 as opposed to the PlayStation 5 discless's $400. However, the Series S suffers from slightly inferior hardware. To give an example, well, slightly might be putting it a little too high. To suffice it, I have a chart here, which I should insert into the video if I actually remember to do this. And it is the GPU power of the Series X, which, by the way, is still the most powerful console on the market, is a bit stronger at 12 a bit, might be a little understatement, 12.15 teraflops, whereas the Xbox Series S is only clocking in at 4. The Series S will also only be able to do 1440p at 60 FPS, whereas the Xbox Series X will be able to do 4K at 60 FPS or 8K for gaming. The RAM is also a bit better, depending on how much the console wants to pull. And the backwards compatibility is basically the same. They more or less have enough. So what they want the Xbox S to be is a very, as they put it on here, a very budget-friendly option. They want people to buy it. It'll be a cheaper way to get into it. You'll be able to get and download all the games. Maybe you don't even need the disc. Basically, if you only really want to play a couple of games a year and you don't really care too much about it being the major portion of what you do and how you do it, they want people to be able to get into next gen for as cheap as possible on something that is still relatively competitive. So for what it's worth, I don't think that it's a bad idea. They definitely want to be able to have it handle what it needs to. And I assume that Microsoft is going to find some way to make this work, because this is exactly what Sony wanted to try to avoid towards the PlayStation 4 Pro's launch, where they had the PlayStation 4 Pro be more powerful. They didn't want people who had the lesser model to hold it. And as long as Xbox maintains that, I mean, it's not necessarily a bad idea. I mean, by far, it's the cheapest console. And then, of course, once someone buys a console, they buy controllers, they buy games, they buy Xbox Live Pass, they buy a whole bunch of other stuff. You kind of gateway them in to buying a whole bunch of other stuff. Whereas with the Xbox Series X, it's a more costly initial investment at $500. And while you might get more in the long run, a lot of people don't really see it as that. They just want to see it as, hey, I want to get this and be done. I don't want to think about it after that, which is, in all accounts, very a fair thing to say. But that's where they're standing with that. Now, PS4 is kind of somewhere in the middle. Both versions of it do not differ between power. You're basically paying $100 for a disc version, which, I mean, you might think, well, what's the point of doing that? And this is something I messed up on my stream, so I'm going to correct the record now. I did not understand why people were so hyped for Scott Pilgrim. First of all, I didn't know that so many people were still fans, because I personally have fallen out of it. I have never seen anyone talk about it online. So I did not understand that people were still very big fans of it. But moreover, I did not understand that they had removed the game from online. I did not know that they did that. They removed the game from being purchased, probably due to some licensing. And now with Ubisoft bringing it back to basically every console, it's back for good, hopefully. And I can get that. I know that feeling all too well. For me, I thought it was just a weird thing that they would randomly drop. And I guess if you don't really follow it or know it too much, they... you know, it's just one of those things, right? Like, you just don't really know why. But that's good for people. But that's the one thing that I'm always fearful of, is that, and of course I have a Steam library, so I'm kind of a hypocrite, but it's that online stuff, you know, they could just pull it at any time. They could prevent you from getting it. And just having discs is like a very nice, solid thing, in my opinion. It's a very good feeling to have a disc. Just to have that physical medium if internet ever goes out, because for me, sometimes my internet even goes out, and I, you know, my as I like to brag, a lot of my stuff is underground, and it's usually fine 24/7, 365. Well, a lot of people don't have that, and it's nice to be able to still be able to play a game even if you don't have internet, you know, or if you're traveling or something like that. And I mean, hell, isn't that basically the portion of the Switch that's, you know, so important, right? Like, they want people to be able to play on the go. You won't always have an internet connection. And I think that we're slowly stepping towards all digital consoles. We're slowly stepping towards between all digital consoles and just like constant online only. I think they finally found a way to sort of finagle that in a way that's a little bit more user-friendly and a little bit less openly talked about. And by the way, there's two other things. The PlayStation will also have PlayStation Plus, which will be a collection that of more or less most of the important games on the PlayStation. They will allow you to play things like, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Oh, here it is, right here. It'll let you play PS4 games on your, I put PC, Jesus. PS5, like Uncharted 4, God of War 2018, The Last of Us Remastered, Mortal Kombat X, Bloodborne, Arkham Knight, Fallout 4, The Last Guardian, Monster Hunter World, Days Gone, Detroit Become Human. Probably forgot a couple. There's a couple more in there. They want you to just have that as an extra. If you don't already own them, you can play them now for free on the PlayStation 5, presumably with PlayStation Plus, which is an incentive for you to keep it around, which is nice. I mean, I think that's really good. But also, on the flip side of that, games are going up to $70. They kind of finagled that one in. They didn't really talk much about it. But that's kind of what they ended up doing. They kind of more or less said, hey, we're going back up to 70, guys. And like I said last time, some games are worth more than 60. A lot of games are worth less. And that is ultimately the problem with it, is that for every one game I could bring up that is worth more than 60, I think there's at least 2 or 3 that are worth less or at 60. And I think that's going to ultimately, it's disencouraging to me, for starters, because like I trust Final Fantasy 16, right? Because I trust Yoshi P after playing his game for 5 years and basically being subbed the whole time. I trust him on that. I trust certain companies. I trusted like Assassin's Creed, but you know, having a mandatory $10 tax basically stapled on, if the quality of games does not increase, and let's be realistic here, you know, these companies, they've been doing the same shit they've been doing for the last 20, 30 years. $60 was never a law. I don't want to, you know, pretend like it was some law. It was an unspoken rule, just that the companies were comfortable at it, making $60, well, they don't make all of it, but, you know, having $60 as the price tag, and customers were happy paying 60 for a lot of stuff. And unfortunately, that's where we're going to go with it. It's unfortunate. PlayStation confirms its games will cost up to $70, and that's going to be a very, very steep hike. I think that's going to be disgusting. They even wait for 2K to come out to see how that's received. So they're just going to go full steam ahead. 2K was just them tipping their hand a little early, and I mean, I guess it didn't cause people to burn down Sony's headquarters, so they don't really care, and they're going forward with it. And you know Microsoft is going to match that. Why wouldn't they? Why would they take $10 less on every game? Unless that the goal would be to attract more people. Like, it wouldn't make sense for them not to. Now, I guess PlayStation Plus Collection kind of goes hand in hand with EA Plus being added to Xbox Game Pass and no extra cost. So I guess EA is kind of really starting to do exactly like what I was saying earlier with the Japanese devs. I guess it's not so much they have lack of faith in Origin, but rather they want everyone to be able to access whatever games they put out in the future. So EA Play is already on Steam. If I open up Steam really quickly, I know you can't see this, I'm not going to edit this in. Can I even search up EA Play? Oh shit, there's a Resident Evil sale. That's pretty awesome. I'm not buying anything, I already own them. EA Play is actually just $5 on Steam. You can join it, and it has a whole bunch of other games. They recently had a whole big sale on Steam, but you get basically all these different games in your library for you to play at the same time. So like they have Dragon Age, they have the Mass Effect trilogy, which is basically the closest you're going to get to getting that on next gen. Need for Speed games, Burnout Paradise, Sea of Solitude, A Way Out, Sims, Spore, Unravel, Peggle, you know, all that kind of stuff. And it's basically a subscription on Steam that you can choose to opt in and opt out. And they have a whole frequently asked questions at the bottom, so I'm not going to get into that because that, you know, that's a little bit specific. But they do have that on Steam, and they have a bunch of other stuff as well, which is kind of nice. And I mean, listen, I can't fault them for that, right? Like, the more people they get to play, the better. I think that's always a good thing when you're a multi-plat dev, to try to handle that. And Microsoft has already shown that they're willing to have no difference between Xbox and PC, which is one of their major strengths, is that they don't want any difference between it. But like I said here, since I put it down here at the bottom, PlayStation 5 has already confirmed that there will be no backwards compatibility. Now, Jim Ryan is no stranger to this. In fact, Jim Ryan himself, I believe, specifically talked about, I'm not going to find it, I need to find it, but specifically, Jim Ryan himself does not really see the point of having backwards compatibility, so this doesn't really come as much of a surprise. The PS4, they wanted to include it because it has a lot of people in it and a lot of games in it as well. So they have the PS5 backwards support the PS4. However, the PS1, 2, and 3 are just go fuck yourself, basically. So that to me is sad. I mean, there's a way to get around that, you know, to release old games, you know, maybe for cheap, right? Like maybe a dollar, a couple dollars, like what Nintendo does. They release some of their games that are old for like $8, $15 and stuff like that, $20 for the Wii games because they're more new. And Honestly, I think that's even a little high. I think a lot of these old games which you would find in a store for like $5 or less, unless they're like really, really, you know, like they're really niche or Nintendo games, you know, they should be less. But I mean, they choose not to sell them at all. So them and Nintendo are in the same fucking boat about that, and they don't care. PlayStation 5 will have 99% compatibility with all with all PlayStation 4 titles. They tested and checked all released games, so to their credit, they will also let people play PS4 games for free, like I said, with the PlayStation Plus. With like Persona 5 was one. I don't know if I mentioned that. That's going to be free on PS5, by the way. They did not have enough time to work on implementing backwards compatibility, and this is from Siliconera, which is a site I really like. And basically, he doesn't really talk about it too much. Basically, yeah, okay, cool. So, other than that, it's disappointing, but like I said, I'm disappointed in both Nintendo and Sony in this aspect. I know the PS3 has its weird cell architecture, but they already have proven that they can have PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games on the PS4. You know, it would kind of make logical sense that they would continue that trend. They have like a couple of games on the PS4 that are from PS2. Like I bought a Bounty Hunter, Star Wars Bounty Hunter on it, and it runs pretty fine. You know, like it basically emulates it no problem. So it's very weird to me that Sony would have this big program where they, you know, they open it up, they have all these games, and then just do nothing with it. Anyway, that's most... Oh, I guess now we kind of get into the game-by-game basis. There's not really too much more here. First off, Halo 3 ODST will drop for PC Master Chief Collection on September 22nd. You will be able to also get upgrades and things for Halo 3. It's looking to be shorter of a what are they called? Unlock tree than the previous games, whereas Reach had you unlock the various armor customizations from Reach, and Halo CE had you unlock, you know, skins and stuff for Halo CE. Halo 3s will be basically more like CE. They won't really have too much armor customization and whatnot. So I'm a little disappointed by that, but again, they are adding basically tons of content to otherwise dead games. Can't really complain too much, and I very much like it and appreciate it. And honestly, I use the Master Chief Collection as sort of another standard of really good ways to implement multiplayer games from the past. Fallout 76 Patch 22 will dynamically level you and let you travel anywhere in the world with any level character. Now, this is something I specifically said I did not like when it was done in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I did not like it in World of Warcraft, and I mean, I don't play Fallout 76 because I would never play that piece of shit, but it's never really been done well. It kind of defeats the purpose of leveling if everyone's level is related to yours. So, like, one thing that I don't like in WoW is that as you level in WoW for the base game from 1 to 60, which will change in about a month when they release Shadowlands, one of the things I don't really like about WoW's leveling is that you basically level, and your levels don't really mean shit. And that kind of defeats the whole purpose of leveling, right? Like, the whole purpose of leveling is you gather levels, stuff is too hard, but it's worth the risk if you try to kill it and do. And they basically have removed that risk-reward element from WoW, because basically everything levels up to you. Now, in base game, everything levels up to a max of 70. Presumably, everything in Lich King and Burning Crusade level you up to 80 and then don't get any higher. And I haven't really gone back to those areas because, like I said, those areas are kind of just there. You know, they get referenced sometimes in future quests, but otherwise they don't really get used that much. They don't really, like, everything scales to like a certain area level based on what expansion it's from or how relevant that area is to the current expansion. That's kind of part of the things I don't really like about WoW, is how they edit old areas to be new, or how they basically have snowboarded most of the leveling into a fast-paced thing. And while it's nice to go anywhere and do anything, what it really means is that because they want stuff to be super fast and quick, you don't really ever spend any meaningful time in all these different areas. A lot of people and a lot of characters probably have never seen half of the base game world with all its locations and quests. And while it is nice that there's quests to do everywhere you turn, it just really is kind of disappointing to me that they really just want to fast track you to the goods. Which is one thing I do like about Final Fantasy XIV, is that It has a story. They take you to all these different areas. You do a lot of stuff. And that to me is why I prefer that game a lot more, especially for the story element. Warcraft has a massive backlog of lore and story and character development and growth and just people doing everything everywhere. And I cite Warcraft 3 as one of my favorite gaming experiences, but I mean, at this point, most of that lore is completely irrelevant or gone, which is really just a tragedy. With the last patch or whatever story element that leads into Shadowlands, they've completely turned Sylvanas from a very interesting character from when I last played in Legion to just a really cheap dime a dozen villain, which just feels completely wrong. And basically, none of the original Horde leaders still are around. It's really just a tragedy, and I'm not a fan of it at all. But I mean, I digress. I just think that dynamic leveling does not really fit well with any game because it kind of erases the concept of progress. In Assassin's Creed Origins, they added it post-launch, and in Odyssey, it's on by default and you can never turn it off, which is one of the reasons why I'm not too big of a fan of it, because you never really feel like you're getting ahead in the world. Everything is just relatively your level or close to it, which is not how an RPG should be. Assassin's Creed Unity also kind of did it, but Assassin's Creed Unity didn't have a leveling system and more had a rating system, which I'm a little sad about. I did not enjoy that at all. But besides that, Halo 3, let's see. Assassin's Creed, speaking of which, Assassin's Creed and Splinter Cell are getting VR games. So there is a new Splinter Cell game. They only went the route of Valve and Half-Life and made it a VR-only game that will be on Oculus VR via Facebook Connect. Now, if you don't know much about Oculus VR and Facebook Connect is basically Big Brother. And that is all I really need to say about it. Facebook Connect will basically force you to use Real ID in order to use it. And if they find out that you're not, you risk being banned. And that, to me, kind of defeats the purpose of having online gaming accounts. I don't really want to have my Real ID linked to every single thing I do in a video game. I'd much rather have my gamer tag or something else like that. That's just a matter of absolute preference. I think they really want to do it so you could share your achievements or whatever online. But it just really seems like a fucking dumb idea for me. Why is it that I absolutely need to... Like, they already have you by, like, credit card numbers and Gmail accounts. And by God, are gaming companies and data companies in general bad at holding on to that information? I mean, for fuck's sake, I mean, every couple of months you hear about a new data leak or something that they just completely fuck up on. I mean, Sony themselves infamously had that massive leak in, what was it, 2010, 2011? Where just they didn't tell people, they lied about it, they didn't say it, and then like a week or so in, when I guess they realized they weren't going to be able to stop it, they actually had to come out and admit it, which is just a tragedy. It's shameful. And this happens all the time, even outside of the video game industry, and I just feel like it's just a dumb idea. I don't want my friends to know what I fucking do in video games. Why the hell do they need to know what achievements I get on whatever and share it via Facebook Connect? Because that's the only real reason I could see them really wanting you to link a Facebook account. Like, but why? None of my friends care about that. I mean, for the people who friends do, I mean, it's cool, I guess, but is it really something that, at risk of being banned, you have to do? Probably not. And it's a really big turnoff for me in particular. And I was considering actually VR a while ago, but I mean, I don't really particularly want that at all. I would just rather worry about what we already have in front of us. And it's really sad that Ubisoft decided to make a new Splinter Cell game, which people have asked for years, only on VR, which is the same way I feel about Half-Life Alyx, a series that's been dead for almost a decade, and in Half-Life Alyx's case, basically more than, I think it was, 13 years? And the only way they could find suit to bring it back was to bring it back as a VR game. That's not really the popular move, in my opinion. That's really kind of a shitty move, made to really kind of pander to a very small niche of the fans, and the rest of them can go to hell, is pretty much what that is. And, I mean, for Splinter Cell, I've seen kickback for it, but I didn't see the same kickback for Half-Life. So maybe people kind of realized it. Maybe Splinter Cell just isn't as well loved. I don't really know. Not really going to get too much into it here. Because the last topic that I have is actually... I think I have it open already. But what I want to do is I want to open it... Oh, crap. I love Opera GX. Sometimes I move a little too fast for it. What I really want to do is I want to open it Oh, you're gonna have to forgive me, because I don't have a browser source. That is not what I want. The last thing I want to talk about is Star Wars news, because recently John Boyega came out and talked about his experience with Star Wars, specifically how he feels that Star Wars kind of slighted him and pushed him to the side, because in the wake of all the stuff that's been going on over the past couple of weeks and months, he's really been a strong participant in a lot of racial conflicts, not necessarily like actual fighting, but specifically, you know, standing up for what he believes in and racial prejudice. I cannot ever do this right. And for me, I think it's astoundingly hilarious to see, you know, people said for years a lot of this stuff, that he was pushed to the side, that Star Wars didn't care, that Disney didn't care for him, they didn't want to go to bat for him. And frankly, it's kind of become true in a very weird way. So specifically, this is the article. John Boyega talked with British GQ. It's a magazine. And he talked about a lot of his story and a lot of his backlash. There's specific portions here where I want to just zip over to. Let's see. George Floyd. What I say to Disney is, do not market a black character as important and then push them to the side. And that specifically is part of one thing that a lot of people said, is that Finn's character in the sequel trilogy was basically there to ultimately be a token black character. I'm going to go on record and say that. I feel like they had an idea with the original sequel trilogy lined up, that they wanted to have a storyline featuring a more diverse cast. I mean, that's kind of what they do with a lot of movies nowadays. They want to have diverse cast, they want to have a lot of stuff, and ultimately what they end up with is objectively bad writing. They end up with characters that kind of just exist and don't really matter, or they do matter and they're just kind of really awfully written. And they basically hitch their horse to Daisy Ridley's character, which is not poorly acted out by her, but rather just a badly written character to begin with. Now, specifically speaking, Daisy Ridley also came out and revealed on a side note that when she was first initially cast for episode 7, they told her that Rey was going to be the daughter of a Kenobi, that she was basically going to be a very relevant character because she's a daughter of presumably Obi-Wan Kenobi. However, then in episode 8, she was told that Rey is a nobody and not important, and therefore it's not as big of a deal that Rey has no parents. It's not a very big importance, which again comes back to the whole idea of director struggle between Abrams and Johnson, whereas Abrams had a story he wanted to tell, Johnson wanted to do something completely different, and they ultimately it kind of culminates in the mess of a film that is The Rise of Skywalker by far. And it just goes back to the fact that they didn't really have any story planned for Star Wars at all. They didn't really have anything lined out that they were ready to really hitch themselves to. And it's kind of sad, because when you think about how big of a franchise Star Wars is, there's no reason for it to have the shitty writing that it does. I mean, I think with Game of Thrones, a lot of people finally saw what had been in the formation for the better part of 5 years come to its burning bright car crash of an ending, which by far is what we see in just a lot of movies, a lot of movies just come out just to be shit, just to pander to nostalgia value. And what could be bigger than nostalgia value than stuff like Star Wars and soon to be James Bond and Star Trek and Terminator and all these franchises, some of which have been around for, you know, the better part of half a century or more. And it just seems to me like they don't really even care enough to really do that. And that's just sad to me. I mean, if you have $1 billion franchise, it shouldn't have like $1 writing. It shouldn't have that little effort put in. And the basis of writing almost anything ever would kind of imply to you that you need to figure out where you're going before you actually get there. You know, if you write an essay, you know, even when I write out, you know, do these podcasts really, really shittily and out of order, I still generally have an idea of where I want to start and where I want to end. And I'm ending after this, speaking of that. But specifically, you know, that's kind of how writing anything goes. You know, you get a general idea of the scope of what you want to write, and then you write it. I'm sure everyone who's listened to this ever is either in school or has attended at least like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, and, you know, hopefully high school. And if you have, I mean, you kind of would know, like when you write a paper, you have your introduction, you have 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, and you have your conclusion that summarizes everything that you learned. I mean, that's why you have thesis statements, and my teachers used to be fucking anal about this shit. They used to be completely up your ass if you didn't do it, because my schools were pretty fucking strict about it, especially when I was in 3rd and 4th grade. This is the shit that they kicked your ass over. They used to really specifically want you to know where you want to start, where you want to end. And the fact that a multi-billion-dollar studio producing a multi-billion-dollar movie can't figure that out is astounding to me. It defies all logic and all reason that they would have a franchise that they absolutely would not even consider the scope of what they wanted to do. They just said, make 3 movies, pump it out, and be done. And I mean, I could not think of a better analogy for Disney at all than to just pump out movies that have no bearing, no value, no nothing. Just mindless stuff to throw on the fucking screen that they know people will go see because of nostalgia value and high marketing. And if that's not like peak capitalism and like peak consumerism, I don't know what is. And it's been very successful, right? Like it could be more successful, I will always argue that. You know, when you look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe and how well planned out that was, even keeping canonicity in smaller things like the Netflix shows, while it's not like the most complex and intellectually written thing ever, I still respect the Marvel Cinematic Universe greatly for maintaining its canon throughout all these different movies and pushing it forward with each one in small ways. So you get this multi-linkage between all these different movies across a decade and a half of acting and cinematic glory. And I mean, it's no big surprise that it's become like sort of a staple in the history of cinema that I think is going to be referenced for hundreds of years hereafter. Because to be fair, it's still going on. Now, where it goes from here, I don't really know. But that's more of a critique of the launch material. The material kind of coming to what I consider to be a natural conclusion with Endgame. And while they might still release movies, I mean, like Disney owns Marvel, and Marvel managed to figure this out. You know, and this cinematic universe for Marvel started with, Iron Man 1 in 2006, which at the time, I don't even know if they really anticipated it being a universe. I think they just wanted to make a remake, seeing the Batman Begins stuff, you know, sort of come to fruition with Christopher Nolan, and seeing how Star Wars kind of came back a little bit and did its thing. I think it's fairly straightforward, you know. And the fact that Star Wars has, at that point, almost like a 30-year head start, like a 36-year head start on you know, episode, well, is it 36? I think it was like legit 30, if not 29-year head start on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and can't figure out where they want their 7 to 9 movies to go, really says a lot. I mean, they threw Lucas's script to the fucking dirt. Lucas himself said they already weren't going to be episodes 7 to 9 because there wasn't really anything else to tell. And there's a lot of stuff that really comes together to show that it's just a fucking mess. I mean, the actors beforehand warned that it wasn't going to be good. You had the C-3PO's actor kind of sort of saying that they pushed him to the side. They didn't give a fuck about him. You have Akbar's actor, I have on my soundboard, where he's like disappointed that his character gets just completely thrown to the side in favor of Holdo. You have Mark Hamill slyly is basically admitting that the movie, if it sucks, it's all Rien's fault, and if it's good, it's also all his fault. You know, and now you have this. You have the stars of the sequel trilogy, you know, sort of coming out. Daisy Ridley admitting she can't find work after Star Wars. How much of that is due to Corona, and how much of that is due to just, you know, people not wanting her after Star Wars is up to your interpretation and research. You have her saying that they told her to be a different character basically in every single fucking movie. You know, you have all this other stuff. And then ultimately you have John Boyega. I'll even bring it back up. Hold on. Here you go. I'm going to read most of this. Let's see. When black men grow out their hair, it's a very powerful thing. I can agree to that, my friend. Absolutely. I'm trying to see where the Star Wars thing starts. And forgive me... forgive me for not pulling this up. I closed my thing and it reset where I was in the fucking article, and I kind of hate that. I'm not going to read all of it. I'm going to skip down to this portion in particular. And if you want to read the article, if I'm not too lazy, I'll hopefully remember to put it in the damn description. So what changed? Well, there were a number of things which we'll come to, but that coalesced to provide some answers. At this stage, I should pause to point out that here and now, it's hard to square this period of personal crisis with the contented, self-actualized man sitting opposite me. We met in a late July day in the privately booked upstairs of a lightly bougie restaurant owned by one of Boyega's friends in London's St. John's Wood, just as the city edges towards another post-lockdown heat wave, and time to take in physical transformation that in his own way is as dramatic as the philosophical shift he has clearly undergone in recent years, mostly gone as the puppyish kinetic figure that many first met during the extended press jamboree of Force Awakens. Though he will occasionally oblige with a pitch-perfect impression, his resting expression is determined, all business smolder. He now possesses stillness and the gym-thickened build of a Depression-era heavyweight. Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, when black men grow out their hair, it's a powerful thing. Big ups. In the continued afterglow of that first franchise-defibrillating Star Wars film, he continued to notice a stylist he'd hired, cringing at certain clothes I wanted to go for. Let's see. And during the press of The Force Awakens, I went along with it, he notes, and obviously at the time I was very genuinely happy to be a part of it, but my dad always tells me one thing: don't overpay with respect. You can pay respect, but sometimes you'll be overpaying and selling yourself short. It was so difficult to maneuver, he says. You get yourself involved in projects, and you're not necessarily going to like everything, but what I would say to Disney is do not bring out a black character, market them to be much more important in the franchise than they are, and then have them pushed to the side. It's not good. I'll say it straight up. He's talking about himself here, about the character of Finn, a former stormtrooper who wielded a lightsaber in the first film before being somewhat nudged to the periphery. Somewhat nudged is a massive understatement. He's also talking about other people of color, Kelly Marie Tran, who played Rose Tico, everyone's favorite, and Isaac Oscar, a brother from Guatemala, actually got me a chuckle. He says Field suffered the same treatment. He is acknowledging that some people will say he's crazy or making it up, but the reordered character hierarchy of The Last Jedi was particularly harder to take. Like, you guys knew what to do with Daisy Ridley, you knew what to do with Adam Driver, you knew what to do with these other people, but when it came to Kelly Marie Tran, when it came to John Boyega, you know fuck all. So what do you want me to say? What they want you to say is, I enjoy being a part of it, it's a great experience. No, I'll take that deal when there is a great experience. They gave all the nuance to Adam Driver, all the nuance to Daisy Ridley. Let's be honest, Daisy and Adam know this. Everyone knows. I'm not exposing anything. All he's really doing is confirming it. And I think that's probably the biggest, strongest point, is that people said this about Star Wars basically the week after Last Jedi aired. It's very obvious in the movie that they didn't really have much for Finn and Rose to do, so they basically send them on a pointless fetch quest to accomplish fuck all, involving a character that didn't even come back for The Rise of Skywalker, because again, they did not have a plan for these characters in movies, and the directors were too busy playing tug of war with each other's ideas to actually make a cohesive narrative. It really reeks about how much time they gave to characters that people either didn't like at the end, namely Rey, or flat out hated, like Holdo, just to kind of shoulder it off and say, well, it's just whatever, it just happened, and that's cool. And obviously it's so important, and all the Last Jedi fans wanted to say, wait for Rise of Skywalker, it'll all make sense in Rise of Skywalker. And I think that's why nobody really wants to defend Rise of Skywalker on any major level, because fundamentally it's bad writing. And you can enjoy something that's fundamentally poorly written. I enjoy a lot of things that are fundamentally cheesy and poorly written and contrived, but at the same time, I'll say exactly that. It's fundamentally cheesy, it's poorly contrived, like Eternal Sonata. I love the game, I love the story, but the love story that they threw in between the two characters I can't even remember was completely forgettable, which is exactly why I don't remember it. It's largely a story of Chopin just dying, just flat out dying, and what the concept of reality is, and what reality he chooses to accept. That's why that game is so good in my mind, because that's the major meat, and everything else, the war between the kingdoms, is just kind of secondary. Like I said, it's a very obtuse game, it's very rough around the edges, but it's a fun fucking game, and I really do enjoy it. It's certainly not like an A, it's definitely like maybe a B- at best. It's just very unique. And I don't think people really want to die on the hill that The Rise of Skywalker is well written, because it basically fundamentally is everything I hate about movies, the modern day movie in general. I mean, Joker might have been pretty heavy-handed about how they had their character development at some points, but I mean, at least it tried, right? I think it did a good enough job of being simple enough for people to follow, but complex enough that it's definitely way more obvious how we went from A to B. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, is it's not just about going from A to B. There's a long, long journey that you need to carefully build yourself towards for it to be pretty good. And I mean, Game of Thrones kind of found that out with how they handled Daenerys' character. They took her from a likable character who would never butcher innocence. Her whole ideology was to break chains, freedom, to bring liberation, have people who love her as well as fear her, and to be a good ruler, into someone whose damn near final scene is a fucking Hitler speech. After standing in the ashes of everything she's burned, all the people she's allowed to be raped, killed, and burned alive by dragonfire in a destroyed city she was supposed to liberate, and how she's going to bring that liberation to the next group of cities. And it's frankly, it's just disgusting. It's really bad. That was really bad, honestly. And that's why you really don't see anybody fucking defend Game of Thrones Season 8. They don't even like it, because the fans didn't like it. The book fans have long since been gone. It's just a mess, but it didn't just come out of nowhere, is the other thing. Is it was kind of built towards as far back as Season 5. But that's another topic for another podcast, by far. And you know me, I usually don't talk about movies on the podcast, because really, I don't care about movies and TV shows. I finished watching The Boys Season 1, so The Boys was pretty good. I thought it was at least a good subversion. Now, that's how you handle subversion. You know, people want to come to Johnson's defense about subversion. I think that's how you handle it really well, to subvert the idea of superheroes. And I think Injustice 1 did that pretty decently, too, just in a fighting game style format. Let's see. Systemic mistreatment of black characters in blockbusters, always scared, they're always sweating. And what he sees is the relative salvage job that returning director J.J. Abrams performed on The Rise of Skywalker. Everyone needs to leave my boy alone. He wasn't even supposed to come back to try and save your shit. Yeah, like I said, I don't really blame Abrams too much for it. I think that he tried, at least with Episode 7. I think Johnson and Abrams at least have to share it 50-50. But I don't think Abrams had much of a choice either. Because, I mean, to be fair, they dead-ended all the plot elements in Last Jedi. So, if you remember anything I ranted about back then, it's basically that. I said the exact same thing I say right now, is that I don't see how they were going to have a villain other than Kylo Ren, and you knew they weren't going to try to kill him as a villain, so. Even though he acknowledges it was an amazing opportunity and a stepping stone, he is exhilarated to finally be saying all this. And I think that says a lot more than it needs to let on. I think a lot of people from Star Wars have a lot to say about how they were treated. And I think they're mostly holding off on it because they still want to have careers. They still want to keep doors open. I just think Boyega's the type of dude who doesn't give a fuck. And that's why he was out there at the Black Lives Matter protests, you know, representing what he believes in. Because his ideologies are more important to him than money. And I think that's hero shit right there. I'll be honest with you. As anime as that sounds, you know, it sounds really anime and cliche, but I mean, I think a lot of people should do that. I think that's important. It's important to stand up for what you believe in. And money for him, I mean, you know, obviously you could, whatever his financials are, I think the fact that he's willing to put a lot of that at risk to say what he needs to say because he knows people will listen to him when he does this. I mean, fuck's sake, he got a whole fucking interview off of this alone, let alone all the public press and everything at the Black Lives Matter speeches. Like, it means something when he wants to stick to it. And I do like that. I think that's admirable. I really do respect him for that, because it's the type of thing that a lot of people just won't do, period, at all. Unless it's politically convenient to do in the moment. They won't do it when it's happening. They'll do it later when they can maybe keep a safe distance. And he doesn't want to keep a safe distance. And honestly, I don't think there's anything else in this article I wanted to do. They had this. They kind of have random quotes here. Nobody else in the Star Wars cast had people saying they will boycott the movie because of them. Oh crap, maybe it's this article's kind of out of order. Let's see. Whereas he previously wanted the fucking recent community agree his casting in Force Awakens with bullishness. Get used to it, smiley faces. Since deleted Instagram post had it, he's now keen to discuss the lasting psychic wounds that an ordeal like that leaves. I'm the only cast member who had their unique experience of that franchise based on their race. Let's just leave it like that. It makes you angry with a process like that. It makes you much more militant. It changes you because you realize I got given this opportunity because I'm in an industry that wasn't even ready for me. No one else in the cast had people saying they were going to boycott the movie because they were in it. Nobody had the uproar and death threats since their Instagrams and DMs and social media saying black this, black that, and you shouldn't be a stormtrooper. Nobody had that experience. And he made peace with a lot of that. Where black men grow their hair out, it's a powerful thing. I'm not gonna lie, his style of dress is fucking killer. I absolutely love his style of dress. I would never pull it off, but yeah. And I think that says a lot about it, is that Star Wars definitely had a rough and tough period, and Disney really did not stick with him. And the Chinese poster says a lot about that. I know Disney really wanted to play up their stuff in the month of June with all the corporate shilling and the fake corporate standing for caring about Black Lives Matter and other things. I think that was also a big part of it. And Disney themselves, you know, they're just as guilty of it as anyone else. They knew what they wanted to do for the most part with 2 characters, and that was it. And that's why in the finale of Star Wars, you only really have those 2 characters ever really doing anything. And you could have almost removed Finn after the first movie. He could have died in the first movie, and fundamentally very little to nothing would have changed. And I feel like it's just a really, really shitty thing that they handled it that well. I would say, though, that Gina Carano is getting harassed on Twitter over the stuff that she said, or rather the stuff they want her to say that she won't say, because she also kind of doesn't fucking capitulate to people. And I do feel bad for her, and Disney is not standing up for her. Like, people cite Kelly Marie Tran getting basically bullied off of the internet, which is only a half-truth at best. And they don't stand for Gina Carano. It's probably almost the same people doing it that bitched about it when it happened to KMT. So I don't particularly feel like the people who argue about this stuff online really actually give a shit, which is kind of what I say about a lot of this stuff in general, is that most people just don't kind of give a shit. They just see that a lot of people don't like stuff, and then they kind of just flip out on it. Like, gamers didn't like certain things happen. I mean, it's basically, and people already, someone somewhere is always linking it back to this. It's basically how Gamergate went down. A bunch of people were upset at nepotism and game journalism, and they somehow flipped it into something completely different. But I digress. I think that's it was definitely one hell of a thing to fucking follow when it happened. I digress, and that's more or less all I have to talk about. As I said, it's been a blast. I do enjoy the podcast. I will try not to delay it too long. I felt that with the PlayStation 5 reveal coming out, it was definitely worthwhile. Oh yeah, there was an Ubisoft Play. I don't even remember what happened on it, or an Ubisoft Forward. They announced something, right? I don't remember. I don't even remember. They have Splinter Cell guy in Rainbow Six. That's about it. I think they announced like one cool thing. I can't even remember what it was, because it happened, and I guess it wasn't that important. Oh, Prince of Persia's getting a remake, Sands of Time. Cool. Great. Glad that the first thing they do with a franchise that's been gone for 9 years is have a remake of a game that's already been remastered. But whatever. I still like the game. Still gonna buy it. It's cool. Whatever. It's actually one of the first games I ever recorded on the channel. I don't even know if that footage is still up. I'd have to actually look. Back in the time when I was playing it, I remember one of the first times I really got back into playing it was on a black and white TV set in Virginia when I was visiting some relatives. And yeah, I played it in black and white. It was pretty fucking cool, man. It was like this was before I had a TV in my room, so I thought that was pretty nice. But anyway, yeah, that's basically the Ubisoft Forward summarized. Maybe there's like a couple things I'm missing, but honestly, I don't remember. It's not that big of a deal. So, thank you for sticking by. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I will see you next time on the verdict. What? The podcast. And I will see you for episode 120, which will be pretty nice. So, see you then.